Hello, BookTube. Well, we come to the end at last. I'm sure that months ago it didn't seem possible, but we have reached the end of ShakeTube 2017. For those of you who might not know, that was an informal and very entertaining read-along that was constructed by Curtis of Curtis Books and Film and Lukash at his channel, in which we read one Shakespeare play a week for 15 weeks, and then just make a video about what you thought of it, knowing that you have a bunch of people who are going to watch because they're doing it too. But without any of the usual page count, benchmarks or communal aspect to it. It was really a perfect BookTube style event. And I loved it, and I feel sorry that I dropped out of it. ShakeTube was once every week, and so because of a really sad thing that happened to me in November, I missed Shakespeare's most effective tragedy, Macbeth, and Shakespeare's least effective tragedy, which is Antony and Cleopatra. I wish that I'd had a chance to talk about them in depth. Of course, I still could, but in terms of ShakeTube, I wish that I still could. I was happy to see that Macbeth worked on everybody. That's great. It is a tremendously honed tragedy. It really is. There's virtually no way not to get caught up in it. And I kind of, in my mind, predicted what the reactions would be to Antony and Cleopatra, and I wasn't very wrong. Antony and Cleopatra it's an explosion of staggeringly beautiful verse. But it doesn't have anything driving it, or at least that's the way it's always felt to me. It doesn't have anything driving it so that you don't feel emotionally involved at all in what should have worked. It should have worked better than anything. Antony and Cleopatra are history's most famous star-crossed lovers. It makes sense that the author of Romeo and Juliet would take that to a whole new level, and to me, it doesn't happen. And I was kind of glad, in a way, to see that it isn't just me, that there were a lot of people on doing ShakeTube who didn't quite know what to make of Antony and Cleopatra. Liked it, certainly, but didn't know quite what to make of it. And this time around, the last play that we're doing this time is The Tempest, which has been, characterized for centuries as sort of a coded farewell on Shakespeare's part to his theatrical career. And there are all sorts of other readings that you can put on it, of course. But that one has always struck me as very convincing. I think that if you read it with that lens, the whole thing becomes about the theater. The whole thing becomes not only about the theater, but about a former ruler of the theater looking back, always looking back, where the events of the past are more present than the events of the present. And I was reading the play again because of ShakeTube, because of our farewell to ShakeTube, and I was realizing that all over again, that it's so melancholy a work that it actually forces Shakespeare to do something that virtually nothing else makes him do, which is to bury the lead, to miss the play. I don't think there's anyone who reads The Tempest who isn't more interested in Prospero's past on the island than they are in, the shipwrecked sailors and anything that might happen when he leaves the island. The backstory of the play is infinitely more interesting than the actual plot, and we don't get enough of it. We see its tentative and partial resolutions years after the fact, but we don't. It's no mystery to me why so much has been written, so many prequels, if you were, have been written about The Tempest. That is no secret to me. Of all the Shakespeare plays, it's the one that seems to beg for it. But also lovely. Also just a lovely, lovely play. And a perfect grace note to end on. And where we look back, having read The Tempest and having read all the 14 other plays, and we try to think about, does this improve your love of Shakespeare? Does it improve your understanding of Shakespeare? I would be willing to bet that most of you agree with me that ShakeTube was a stunning success on both those counts. That hearing what other people had to say about these plays ended up being not only interesting, but instructive. Certainly I did, and I've read all these plays at least 100 times each, and I've taught a lot of them, so and I still learned a lot. I loved that part of it. And when I mention learning about Shakespeare in a professorial setting, that almost invokes someone, doesn't it? Yes. When Lukash and Curtis started off this ShakeTube, they kind of thought that one of our guiding texts would be Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom. And he hung around like Banquo's ghost for a while at the beginning, and then he sort of drifted off, because I think a lot of people who were reading his book while they were reading the plays weren't all that impressed with what they were reading, and maybe stopped reading Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. And if that's true, they were spared the ending, because when he's done going play by play, Bloom then wraps things up with by reiterating his thesis, which is that Shakespeare's body of work taught humanity how to regard itself, taught it how to think about being human, actually changed the species zeitgeist, which is, among many other A words, that is absurd. And when I read this book when it first came out, he states that full, it goes on it, goes at it with full trumpets at the beginning of the book, and I thought, okay, fine. For getting attention of reviewers who aren't going to read a 900-page book anyway, and then you talk about the plays, fine. But when you wrap up, you're certainly going to modify this, because you couldn't possibly believe it. You couldn't possibly believe it. Every one of the zeitgeist changes that you're saying Shakespeare created are present in Aeschylus. They're present in Sophocles. You can't possibly be meaning this. So in the end, you're going to wrap up with something else. But no, no. At the end of Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, Harold Bloom doubles down on his theory. He says, Shakespeare's influence, overwhelming on literature, has been even larger on life, and thus has become incalculable, and seems recently only to be growing. It surpasses the effect of Homer and of Plato, the challenges of the scriptures of West and East in the modification of human character and personality. Scholars who wish to confine Shakespeare to his context, historical, social, political, economic, rational, theatrical, may illuminate particular aspects of the play, but are unable to explain the Shakespearean influence on us, which is unique and which cannot be reduced to Shakespeare's own situation in his time and place. So Shakespeare, the Elizabethan dramatist, suddenly becomes a new strain of bacteria who cannot be restrained by literature or theater, even though he's literary writer for the theater, but somehow infects all of humanity, far outside of the scope of his time, his place, his antecedents, and his chosen art form. He's in the air, you see, which is, well, like I said, it's absurd. There are, at the time that Harold Bloom wrote this book, the population of planet Earth was 6.8 billion people. And of those 6.8 billion people, 6 billion of them had never heard the word Shakespeare, had never seen a Shakespeare play, nor had ever come in any contact with anyone who had ever heard of Shakespeare, seen a Shakespeare play, or read a Shakespeare play. So no. No, Shakespeare didn't teach us to be human. Talk about hypocrisy, that you can go through your whole book banging on about the evils of colonialism, and then claim that Shakespeare taught, for instance, if your world-straddling hypothesis is correct, the Japanese how to be human, the nuances of self-regard as a human, the Japanese, who gave us their literary tradition, which existed 1,000 years before Shakespeare drew a breath, and which has everything that Shakespeare does. And the only way that you could say this is if you were ignorant of that or had such a Colonel Blimp colonial mind frame that you were dismissing it out of hand. One of those two things is certainly the explanation here. So one way or another, I think it was probably best that we left Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, behind this time around. But I have a suggestion. I'm not going to tell you that I was shirtless Skyping with Curtis and Lukasha, that they agree. I'm not going to put words in their mouth. I might gently suggest that you tootle on over to their channels and perhaps echo my idea? My idea is that we do ShakeTube 2018. Same time, same place, end of next year. And that in addition to reading 15 other plays, we pick another guide to Shakespeare, and I have one in mind. Shakespeare overall. Or is it Shakespeare after all? Oh, God. Well, make a mental note before we get to it. Before we get to ShakeTube 2018, we're going to have to know the name of the book. But it's by Marjorie Garber, the great Marjorie Garber, and it is along the same lines as Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. It's a big, fat guide to Shakespeare that has an effulgent opening, then it goes play by play, and then it has an ending. But I can assure you, it doesn't go off the rails. It doesn't make stupid claims. It's in my opinion, it's the successful version of this book. And it's widely available. The author is Marjorie Garber. It's Shakespeare After All or Overall. It might be Shakespeare After All. And it is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So even if we don't use that as a guidebook to ShakeTube 2018, you should still all read it. Especially, you know, have it next to your nightstand when you're reading a certain play. But I think Curtis and Lukács should pick a dozen other plays, and we should just do this again. We should all meet again next year and have this fun all over again. But in the meantime, I wanted to say thank you to both of them. This was a wonderful, fun event. I'm sorry that I dropped out because of my beautiful Malin Moore, but I'm back, and just in time to wrap it up. Just in time to wrap it up with The Tempest, in which a bunch of humans land on a supernatural island and you know, sort of wander around. But the supernatural island is inhabited by a powerful sorcerer who used to be the ruler of a city and who has supernatural servants and who's had an extensive supernatural past on the island. And he's raising a human daughter amidst it all. Oh my God. Wouldn't you rather read a play called Prospero than one called The Tempest? Anyway, we don't necessarily want to end on a negative note. The Tempest is a beautiful play. It's just always frustrated me because it's one of the only Shakespeare plays where I think the focus is in the wrong place. Even when, at first blush, in other Shakespeare plays where I thought, okay, the focus is clearly wrong here, I have come around. I have seen his genius, but I have been studying The Tempest forever, and it's not there. It doesn't. I don't ever have that moment. So I think it's just a dramatic misfire. It's just so brilliant that it feels weird to call it that. But one way or another, we're going to end on that. This is the end of ShakeTube 2017. What fun it was! And we'll move on in the new year to other read-alongs, including, I hope, the mega-long, a gigantic read-along that I want to do myself, that you're all invited to join. I want hundreds of people. But we'll figure all that out in due time. In the meantime, we're bidding adieu to Shakespeare and to Professor Bloom. And I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.